Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to War in the Pacific Admirals Edition, our play-by-email game against XTRG. We're into 1942, and the Japanese are driving in the South Pacific for the Fiji Line, which has defenses on the island of New Caledonia, Fiji, and Pago Pago. And we've spotted the Japanese carriers off the coast of New Caledonia, where they have recently hit and severely damaged several American ships and also sunk a few transports. Meanwhile, our efforts to stem the tide of Japanese submarines just obliterating our forces is continuing, as we have numerous anti-submarine warfare patrols out trying to hunt and destroy Japanese submarines. You can see here there's a submarine I-168 being depth charged by some British and Dutch destroyers off the coast of Java right here as we're opening up the turn. I always like to see a turn start with submarines being depth charged rather than torpedoing our ships, so this seems to be a decent start. There you can see a direct hit with severe damage. The sub's taking on water, near misses all over this thing. Hopefully, she's going to be sunk. We did claim, I think it was 2 enemy submarines sunk last turn. I don't know if those are real or confirmed kills. I don't remember seeing anything sunk. But if we can do that, I mean, we know for sure we've already sunk at least 1 Japanese sub. So if we can get 2 more, 3 more, 4 more, as many as we can get, it'll weaken his ability to interfere with our convoys a bit. And you can see there the Jupiter actually ran out of depth charges. 9 depth charges on I-166, heavy damage. She might not sink, but she should be out of the war for a little while at least. But she is heavily damaged, and the British destroyer Jupiter is out of submarine ammunition. Meanwhile, several reaction spots this turn here. You can see I-17 off the coast of New Zealand also being hunted by Allied submarines, the Le Trompe. No damage done, unfortunately, but it did at least force the submarine to submerge, and we didn't see an attack from that submarine this turn. Meanwhile, the American submarine Salmon off the coast of Japan is being targeted, I guess. The troop transport Dominion Monarch being torpedoed by the RO-34, but the torpedoes missed there. Meanwhile, that was our battleship convoy there, which was just refueled. You saw there was a little notification that the Oilers were done refueling them and they were returning to Oosthaven, and our battleships will continue on their way. That's the Prince of Wales as it's trying to slowly make its way toward safety in South Africa. Meanwhile, the cargo ship Liberty just took a torpedo off the coast of Pago and it sank. The I-23 is also torpedoing some destroyer mine layers near near Pearl Harbor, and our destroyers are attempting to depth charge it. And you can see here they're getting some shots off here. We'll fast forward there. No hits, no serious damage in that night phase. So 1 Japanese torpedo at night, 1 ship sunk, and temporary flotation failure aboard. Oh no, the Duntron sank. Well, we just lost 1 more ship that had been damaged by the Japanese aircraft. Meanwhile, the Mariposa off Johnston Island just took a Japanese torpedo. We have a destroyer task force and destroyer escorts there, and they're apparently of no use. Meanwhile, the American submarine Pompano is attacking an ACM, an armed cruiser merchant. It fired its torpedoes, but did not gain any hits. It's going to be a frustrating next couple of years as we wait for the American torpedoes to get fixed. All right, so we're into the day phase. The night phase was not super active, actually more active in favor. Again, only 1 Japanese torpedo hit its mark. Meanwhile, our submarine, the Grayling, is attacking a Japanese light cargo ship, an AKL, so a light cargo ship, 1 shell hit, 1 torpedo hit, heavy damage. And she probably sinks. Meanwhile, the Pike is attacking a Japanese destroyer to no avail, and she is depth charged, although not crippled. At least it claims no hits. The SS Shark off the coast of Wake Island is being attacked. Meanwhile, the I-170 is torpedoing another merchant ship off the coast of Pago Pago. I really need to get that port up to level 3. Once it gets to level 3, it will be immune from Japanese submarines. But right now it's currently level 2. You can see we lost a second cargo ship there this turn. So 2 cargo ships sunk by enemy submarines this turn. Meanwhile, we know there's a lot of submarines off the coast of Fiji. They've been wreaking havoc there for quite some time. We're fast-forwarding through some of this recon activity. You can see the Japanese running a sweep over Medan. But just a lot of recon activity here that I'm kind of fast-forwarding through just because it's not super exciting to watch. Okay, blah, 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 more recon. 17 Lily bombers hitting Medan, which is where most of our Dutch bombers on the island of Sumatra are based out of. Meanwhile, we've got our own bombers going into Mersing. There are 10 Japanese Oscar fighters intercepting. We have 14 P-40E Warhawks escorting some 15 bombers. So fast forward through the air combat there. Looks like all the bombers reached their target. We're claiming 1 Oscar destroyed while losing 2 P-40Es. Some of the bombers were damaged, nothing destroyed. Very limited Japanese troops killed. Meanwhile, another raid, this one with 8 bombers being intercepted by the Japanese again. Looks like we might have lost 1. Yeah, we lost 1 Hudson. 26 Buffaloes escorting some 28 torpedo bombers. So that's a large air formation that makes it through unscathed, dropping its payload on the Japanese there. 21 casualties for the Japanese. 9 Buffaloes escorting 8 forts. Everybody comes through fine. 1 Oscar is claimed destroyed. So that's, I mean, that's a lot of air activity on the Malay Peninsula. Meanwhile, there appears to be some Japanese torpedo bombers here attacking our troop transports. So, as you may remember, we've shuttled about 20,000 supply into Bataan and really strengthened the force there. But I figured these AMCs and these small cargo ships that we had would be highly vulnerable to the Japanese if they ever got air in there. And they probably could reach with their GM3s or GM4s, but it looks like they've got a light carrier here just off the coast of North Borneo that will probably ravage and sink most of these ships here. You can see they sank the AMC Maroon, 5 torpedo hits and sunk. It's an AMC, so it's not a cargo ship. Again, all these cargo ships over here, guys, these are dead. The point of these things is to do as much cargo, bring as much supply into Bataan, but they're expendable ships. They're really not very efficient or ideal for most of our uses. So we've got another raid here, another one of these convoys. You can see the AKL Shini took 8 bomb hits and was sunk by 8 Kate dive bombers. So that's 2 ships sunk by Japanese air. 41 Zeros sweeping over Singapore. That's a lot of enemy air activity over Singapore. I'm wondering how much more this turn has to give us in terms of air. Looks like he's going after Singapore again. So 20 Sally bombers are hitting Singapore, claiming quite a bit destroyed on the ground. 117, 1 Flying Tiger, 1 P-40B, 1 Swordfish, 1 Buffalo. So 5 or 6 aircraft on the ground there from those 20 Sally bombers. We really ravaged his bomber fleet. I think we shot down over 100 Sallies. So he doesn't have anywhere near as strong of a bomber force as he had before. But nonetheless, he launches a raid with 20 of them. Now, we have about 90 fighters that we could rise to the, try and intercept him. So that's something to keep in mind. Meanwhile, 12 more Kates going after another cargo convoy here. This is an AVP. This is I think it's a tender of some kind. Whatever. It's like a 100-ton ship with like 100 supply. She's vanished from being sunk here by enemy Kate bombers. They hit her with torpedoes. A waste of Japanese resources, in my opinion. That ship is not worth very much. Alright, so that should do it for the AM phase. Meanwhile, we've got the Shark here torpedoing Japanese merchants at Wake Island. A successful torpedo hit, but no explosion, so the Mark 14 strikes again. No surface combat. Escorts are hunting for the I-170 off Pago. She did do some damage to our ships there. and it's the American destroyer Farragut depth charging her. So she drops a couple charges and then loses contact with the Japanese and gives up. American destroyers suck ass at anti-submarine warfare patrols at the moment. Meanwhile, the I-169 engaged off the coast of Sydney, but again, that was given up. And a hit but no explosion against the Thatoro Maru by the SS Grayling north of Tarawa. Oh, the President Coolidge sinks. Damage control parties got trapped or something, and the ship sank. Meanwhile, the Japanese try and torpedo our destroyers at Johnston Island. They fail. Our destroyers counter with depth charging, claiming hits on the front of the sub, damaging the front of the torpedo tubes there, and then losing contact with the sub. So 2 hits, minor damage. Damn it, the President Coolidge was seemed like a charmed ship. She had taken a lot of damage and managed to survive, but something happened with the damage control parties there being trapped in part of the ship, and then the flooding caused the ship to sink. So, bombardment attack at Mersing. You can see here we did a little bit of damage, 12 Japanese troops disabled, just to kind of feel them out and see what they've got there. I've noticed in this game the Japanese can be very difficult to overcome. You basically have to wipe them out, which means taking a lot of casualties and taking a lot of time. And I haven't decided yet if it's worth the amount of damage it'll do to my troops to wipe them out at Mersing. If it ends up exhausting my defense of Singapore, that may not be wise. But at the very least, we've reinforced Mersing massively so that it's sort of a new tripwire in the advance down towards Singapore and is not in any risk. He could probably land a brigade of reinforcements there and it would still be at no risk of falling to the Japanese there. All right. So that's going to do it for the combat replay. We're going to go ahead and jump out here, and then we will jump back in a moment because the game does kick us out. So we'll jump out. We've got some destroyers arriving at Aden. But yeah, anyway, guys, I'll see you in a second on the flip side. All right, everybody, let's take a look here. We can see the Japanese carriers have moved closer to New Caledonia. They appear to be moving southwest toward Nomaya. So they're probably going in for a bombing run or planning on interdicting various convoys in here, so something for us to be aware of. I could retreat with these troops here. We've got a battalion of soldiers here in Task Force 353 headed toward Nadi, but at current directions, they're headed away from the Japanese carriers. If we're moving south, if the Japanese carriers sweep east, there's a good chance they'll actually kind of run into that force. So we'll keep them moving toward Nadi. Meanwhile, we'll order the transport almost completed unloading at Nadi away. You can see here that the units at Suva have largely all left or evacuated. We have a couple of ships at port, largely because they don't have fuel to get away. But they're just a couple of small-ish ships. There is one... I'd rather not lose him if I don't have to. But there are a couple of troop transports in here that are somewhat valuable, somewhat large as well. But likewise, they literally have no fuel and no ability to get out. And I don't think I have sufficient fuel. Yeah, they're going to have to stay there. But we'll see their fate will depend on what he's gonna do with his carriers. Our other ships over here are racing west to get back to Australia, and it'll be interesting to see if he tries to make like a raid. No, you need to go back to Brisbane. It'll be interesting to see if he makes any kind of raid on Australia itself or not. He's using some of his precious sorties against the transports around here. He can only fly so many combat operations off those decks. He hasn't gone with a max effort yet, but nonetheless, that's something just to keep in mind. Where's this guy going here? This AKL headed that way. These replenishment ships headed over this way. It's just a tan, though, and some three destroyers. So that's the situation in the South Pacific. One other thing to call out, I know there was a lot of activity around Pago. I've added a second anti-submarine patrol here to try and help tamp down the Japanese submarines operating in the area. And that is in part because we have some troops here, the 8th Marine Regiment, that are beginning to unload at Pago Pago. So obviously we want to make sure they get as safe as they can be. So we are ordering them to unload the 8th Infantry Regiment at Pago Pago, and then we have another infantry regiment somewhere back here. Nope, that's a fighter squadron. These guys back here. We have the 34th Infantry Regiment and some construction regiments also on the way to Pago Pago. Pago Pago doesn't appear to be an atoll. It's a base, so it doesn't actually have a stack limit, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. But anyway, so that's the situation there. Not a lot to report in around Pearl Harbor. Battleships still retreating back. Carriers still on the way to Pearl. Probably about 2 days out of Pearl, I would guess, at current paces for the Yorktown. Meanwhile, in the west, we can see the Prince of Wales has refueled from those fleet oilers. She's up to basically 100%, 99%, and her float damage dropped one more, so from 59 to 58. Speed is still 7 knots, still 21 system damage, 38 engine damage, and she is making very, very slow progress toward the edge of the map, but she is almost there. Meanwhile, the Repulse is closing in on Cape Town, where she'll be repaired. She's about 26 hexes away. I think I did my math wrong. I said 4 or 5 days last turn. I think she's moving 4 hexes a day, which would mean closer to around 7 days. I can't do math, but 7 days before she arrives back. So inside the week, by the end of the second week of January, she should be back repairing from her damage. Meanwhile, we had 3 brand new destroyers arrive at Aden, so we're forming this force up with 3 British destroyers to move into the theater. These guys are really good destroyers. They're level 8 anti-submarine warfare destroyers. So these guys are cream of the crop, experienced, very good anti-submarine warfare platforms that should help us bring havoc upon the Japanese submarine force once they do arrive in theater. In addition to that, we're loading up 3 different task forces of tankers, all at Abadan, which are all going to supply about 41,000 additional fuel to India to help fuel the Indian economy. Beyond that, we've got some troops that are arriving. Let's actually disband these guys here. And we've got these guys over here. The British brigades are on the way to India, where they can finally unload at Chittagong. And from there, I don't think there's a lot of progress here. Pegu fortifications are level 2 up to 54%. Rangoon fortifications are 2 up to 53%. If we move into China here, we can see the Japanese have moved on this core, this 64th Chinese Corps, but hopefully it makes it to Nanning this turn without any trouble. Some Japanese advances toward Ichang, we already knew that. Meanwhile, we pulled our troops out of Changchao, and they have now all arrived at Luoyang, all currently in move form. So we're going to go switch them all over to rest. But we have a large force here, 2,600 assault value. We're going to struggle to even come close to supplying those troops, but we'll do our best. So we're going to switch them over to rest, hopefully to try and minimize the supply cost. I'm assuming rest minimizes how many supplies you're consuming. The only exceptions are the headquarters and the engineer units are all going to be set to combat, mainly because I want them providing their support and their capabilities here to the troops that are in these bases to make sure that they don't oops, I should have kept them on rest, so that we maximize like our construction and our supplies and all of that. Meanwhile, we're going to move the rest of these guys over to rest. Some of them are still on move. Sorry, I thought I had done all this already. Okay, so that's it. The engineers are in combat, so they get their work done. Everybody else is on rest. Meanwhile, we've got some Flying Tigers that are ready to kind of move back to their base at Changsha, which is also getting low on supply, unfortunately. All right, we're going to move these guys, and almost all the Flying Tigers now have pulled out of the coastal base that we moved them to at Wangchao. Meanwhile, that's kind of China. Not a lot has changed in China. Not a lot going on in India or Burma this turn. In terms of Singapore, we're going to fight another major air battle. He did bomb Singapore last turn. It didn't do any damage to the airfield, so the airfield's still safe. But it did do a little bit of damage to a few of the aircraft on the ground. and I'm going to intercept everything I can. I'm going to scramble 78 aircraft, intercept his fighters, and we'll see how it plays out. We've got some 13 P-40Es, 3 P-40Bs. We've got about 37 Buffaloes. I can't do math. 37 Buffaloes and about 20 Flying Tigers. So a pretty respectable fighter force, although it's not certainly invincible. These guys, let's just stand them all down. All right, what's that get us to? Base administration to 10. Okay, perfect. Meanwhile, I am going to fly some B-17s over to Miri to try and hit the oil refineries there. They're suffering quite a bit of damage. Our intel says 188 of the 300-ish oil refinery and oil production at Miri is damaged from the British, who were retreating, so that's good news for us. But we are going to go ahead and try and hit it with bombers to maybe reduce that a little bit more and lower the effectiveness of the oil production there, which will in turn hurt the Japanese economy based out of Miri. So that's an objective there. We've got about 10 B-17 Flying Fortresses flying toward Miri. Probably wouldn't do more than 1 or 2 damage at the most, but any extra damage we can do, hey, that's worthwhile, I think. That's India. That's Malaya. I don't have a lot else going on this turn. One other thing worth calling out is his carriers. We do have a light carrier task force. This says there's apparently 2 fleet carriers and 3 light carriers. We have no reason to believe that because it also says there's like 5 heavy cruisers. I don't think there's anywhere near that. The intel suggests despite all those aircraft, there's only 43 aircraft in the formation. Despite all those carriers, there's only 43 fighters or bombers in the formation. So my assumption there is that it's probably a CVL, maybe 2 CVLs operating out of here, and I'm ordering a slew of submarines to close in on the area. So we've got 2 submarines coming in from the Sebes Sea. We've got 3 submarines leaving off the coast of Miri to block the withdrawal back to the Sulu Sea, and we've also formed up some submarines here at Surabaya. I think we've got 3 sub-patrol task forces that are going to be heading in that direction as well to block access to the Mascar Sea. So who knows? I think he'll probably evacuate out this way and then head toward Beldabop, but we're going to move subs to block the Mascar Sea, to block the Celebes Sea, and to block the Sulu Sea. If he moves towards Celebes, then frankly, that's probably his best course and our least likelihood of intercepting him. But any of the other directions will have even more submarines. So we'll have to see how things play out. But that's a general gist of the situation there. One other thing worth calling out here is he does appear to have reinforced his troops at Clark Field, so there's now 3 enemy units there. So we're continuing to not attack. We do have sufficient supply for the moment. The defenses there are level 2. We're working on level 3. Probably will never get there. Meanwhile, Bataan is still at level 3 fortifications, but they're up at about 50% on the way toward level 4 fortifications. Singapore is currently at level 2 fortifications, I believe it is. Nope, level 3, 21% of the way to level 4. And then Johor Bahru, which is sort of our speed bump there, is almost to level 2. We're continuing to kind of just keep the minor pressure on at Mersing, although not too heavy. And we have one cargo ship, the Munlok, coming in from Palembang with about 4,100 supply on it, which is going to be landing at Singapore as well. And my hope is that it gets in there and it unloads those supplies before it gets destroyed from Japanese air cover. I really want to get more supplies in there. Singapore's only got about 42,000 supplies, with about 3,000 further north, while Bataan has 59,000 supplies, and its spoilage level is at, I think, 53,000, so it's barely above the spoilage threshold, thanks to rushing in some 20,000 supply or so via various supply convoys. Bataan is in pretty good shape from a supply perspective. In addition to that, we do have these Japanese carriers down here that could and probably will interdict this task force of about 7 or 6 AKLs, which had been dealing in the bulk of the supply into Bataan. So that supply route's probably closed now, but it's been well worth it to get the supplies in there that we were able to get in there. Meanwhile, continuing to try and pull oil out of the Dutch East Indies, we've got a couple of tankers moving around. Not a lot of activity. We've got one big tanker that's going to go into Oosthaven, 5,100 tons of potential oil that it can carry. We've got another tanker at Surabaya with 3 destroyers, 2 tankers, about to pull about 22,000 oil out of there and bring it toward Australia. We've just taken 1,800 out of Tijilap. Taken. Meanwhile, some other tankers coming back, some other tankers going south, so about 9,400 fuel on that group. These guys appear to all be leaving. Perth, meanwhile, still has some units unloading. We've got 20,000 units of fuel being unloaded by these 2 tankers here at Perth. Perth currently has 79,000 fuel, but that's because a lot of it's getting sucked into other parts of Australia. So like Sydney's at 130,000 fuel, which is good because we need that to fuel the economy, which generates the supply, which in turn supplies the troops and keeps our defenses strong. Meanwhile, Darwin, yeah. So that's kind of the situation here this turn. Not a huge amount of activities going on. One thing worth kind of calling out is I did spot an enemy tanker, we think. 3 ships spotted. We're reporting 1 tanker moving southeast toward Tarawa. So I don't know if that means he's supplying Tarawa. Tarawa is only a level 1 port. I got to imagine the bulk of his logistics are coming out of either Kwajalein or Truk. But I did think that was interesting. Our subs did engage. I don't think they engaged a tanker. It would be cool if and I've ordered my subs to kind of continue shadowing this group, because even though I think it's probably not, maybe they're going to touch at Tarawa and then head south toward Espiritu Santo. That would be my assumption. But I'm going to order these submarines to continue tailing them to see if we can knock out a Japanese tanker, because if we could, that would be great. Meanwhile, we've got a bunch more submarines on the way toward Kwajalein, which is where I think his easternmost base is located in terms of like a strong naval base. We also have Japanese units at Truk, but that's a much larger anchorage and more difficult to shut down. Kwajalein could be an opportunity for some cheap kills, and maybe we can catch these guys before they can get down to the Japanese carriers. Meanwhile, Espiritu Santo has fallen, Tulagi has fallen, and Shortlands has fallen. It's clear he's trying to build some kind of wall or shield toward his bases here. It's a little bit of a salient down here toward the south, but this is probably his jumping off point for any landings on New Caledonia or Fiji if they're not already underway or on the way. Meanwhile, that's kind of a shield against supplying the eastern Australian coast. But even if he does take New Caledonia or Fiji would be more difficult, I think. But New Caledonia is actually far enough west and north that we could probably still supply in here to New Zealand and then shuttle from New Zealand to like Melbourne or Sydney without too much risk from probably Melbourne, without too much risk from his torpedo bombers. Anyway, guys, that's it for this episode. I don't really have a lot else going on this turn. It was an interesting combat result. If we take a look, we did lose about 18 aircraft, 10 on the ground, 5 air-to-air, 3 ops. He lost 5 ops, 1 flak, 2 air-to-air, so not a very bad day for him. 18-8 in terms of the air combat loss. Ships lost were worse. If we just look at last turn and we just look at ours, we did lose the President Coolidge, which was a pretty valuable troop transport. We lost the cruiser merchant ship, the Manura, and then we lost a smaller troop transport, the Duntron, as well as some cargo ships, the Henry Grove, the Liberty, the Diamond Head, the aircraft tender patrol, the Heron, and the light transport Shinny. Meanwhile, the Japanese didn't lose anywhere near that much. They lost the 1 light transport, the Shonan Maru, and then they lost the I-166 to depth charging near Batavia from those British destroyers. So that was a good result at the very least. If intelligence is to be believed, if we're looking at all the ships sunk so far on the Japanese side that are submarines, we're claiming to have sunk 4 fleet boats. Japan only had 160 subs in the entire war. So if we've sunk 4 fleet boats in a single month of combat, I mean, imagine if we could be sinking, actually less than a month of combat still, but imagine if we could be sinking 4 or 5 submarines a month. By the end of the year, the Japanese submarine force would be crippled. It would have lost almost a third of its total wartime, actually more than a third of its total wartime strength, and we'd see a rapid decrease in the amount of damage that he'd be doing with his submarines. So that would be a positive result if we can continue this trend up on his submarines, assuming that those results are in fact true. With that being said, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign this one off. We'll see what happens next time around, but until then, this is the Historical Gamer saying once again, thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm out.